Today I'll be sharing a little bit about the Marshall Fire response efforts that the district was involved in, as well as just some brainstorming ideas of where we might be going in the future. I definitely want to take this opportunity to recognize just the efforts of the first responders that got the fire under control. Very clear that Boulder County OEM and all the entities that support them are really good at their job and really well prepared to face whatever disaster comes their way. Unfortunately, there's been far too many disasters in the Boulder area in recent history here. I also want to recognize our local government partners that were kind of impacted by the fire, people from City of Boulder, OSMP, Boulder County, Louisville and Superior. Folks from these entities really been working pretty tirelessly since the event to really kind of get their communities back online and get them back kind of more resilient than ever. And they deserve a pat on the back. So if you're talking from someone from those communities today, kind of tell them thank you. Really much of what I want to talk about today has to do with kind of building relationships and kind of support networks so that these local government partners can react to these disasters and kind of be able to do their job appropriately. One of the great places to start there is at your neighboring communities. I was so impressed to see the neighboring communities around the Marshall wildfire really step up and kind of take action, not only to lend just staff support, but expertise and resources for everything from doing water quality, BMP improvements and monitoring, to kind of working day and night to get the drinking water systems back online so that people could ultimately get moved back into their homes. I also want to there we go. And then finally, I want to recognize the overall stormwater community. You may notice I've credited Andrew Earls with kind of taking this photo here. Right Water was just one of the many consultants and contractors that reached out to us to really offer support and offer their expertise. And just so thankful for all the support that community has provided. So thank you. And so what is the district's role in responding to a wildfire? On the screen here, I've listed kind of what our standard operating procedures are for what we're supposed to do when a flood comes. On a yearly basis, right before flood season, we have a meeting and we talk about exactly what is our role during a flood. And there's this lengthy SOP document that basically dives into the details too, but no meeting or document really exists for how we should respond to a fire. So, I think in general, the bullet points here serve well for just about any disaster. Now, as shown on the flooding SOP here, one of our first steps during the Marshall wildfire was simply to stay out of the way, let those first responders do their jobs, but at the same time kind of raise our hands and just let everyone know that we were here to help and we had resources. So in watching the news coverage of the event, it was pretty clear that the drainageways and the detention ponds that we maintain in the area were being directly impacted by the fire. It took about a week for us to get into these sites to do an initial assessment, and I'll never forget that first day of kind of visiting those sites. The open space areas that we'd been kind of accustomed to kind of working in were completely gone and just devastated. There was an eerie silence to the area, no birds chirping, no kids playing, just quiet. The smell of the area, just campfire smell exists to this day. And then just the visuals of those burnt drainageways and the lack of the surrounding homes is just totally unbelievable, and it's kind of hard to even put words to it. But outside of the devastation to the surrounding communities, there's actually a little bit of optimism that the drainageways that we're interested in would bounce back. This is mainly due to the kind of grass-down nature of the area. So after those initial inspections, kind of our first steps were pretty clear. The firestorm had blown a lot of just household burnt debris into the creeks that needed to be removed. And then there were a lot of these kind of down limbs and down trees and standing hazardous burnt trees that needed to be removed as well. So for the past few months, we've been working with crews from Arbor Force as well as Vias Construction to basically remove those trees. And so the image on the left there is pretty typical of kind of the conditions we found in the more heavily treed sections of Coal Creek and other areas along the fire. And so we removed these trees from areas along Rock Creek and Superior, as well as Coal Creek and Superior and in Louisville. So outside of our work kind of in and around those channels, we worked to support our local government partners with really responding to some of those initial water quality threats that originated from the fire. As you see on this slide here, this is a picture of the Sagamore neighborhood. So immediately after that fire, all the sediment and ash and just burned pollutants from the homes was susceptible to flowing into that storm drain sewer there. And then ultimately that storm drain leads to the creeks that we're so interested in kind of maintaining and improving. The Concrete Express, or CEI, was really a critical partner to the district and to our local government partners with responding to these initial water quality threats. We approached CEI on January 3rd, just a few days after the fire, with just the idea of installing inlet protection for all of the burnt areas around Louisville. They got a map on the 4th, and by the evening on the 5th, they had the majority of the inlets protected before a snowstorm rolled into town. And really most of this work, we've installed inlet protection for about 49 inlets in really a matter of days, and most of this work was done on a handshake deal, which is not typically something you should be doing, but for me, it was really reassuring to know that our contracting partners were really willing to just step up and take action because it was the right thing to do. And it really showed us that, all the hard work of kind of building up the relationship between the district and CEI had really come to kind of fruition there. So to date, the district has spent approximately $400,000 responding to the Marshall wildfire. I do anticipate a little bit more to come. So the biggest question since the fire occurred was, will there be increased flood risk as a result of the fire? Soon after the fire, it was determined that CWCB would lead the initial assessment efforts to determine what kind of flood risk would result from the fire, and that the district would then take any results from that and kind of implement any mitigation measures. The Colorado's assessment is being referred to as a CoBear Assessment. This is a Colorado-led burn area emergency response assessment. So there's kind of 4 main steps to this. The first step is looking at the level of burn severity, so how hydrophobic did the soils get during the fire. The second step is what will the flood response be from those soils. Third is identifying values at risk or critical infrastructure. And then the fourth is coming up with a plan to protect that infrastructure. Just so impressed with the state's efforts, and definitely want to recognize CWCB, Kevin Hauk and Chris Sturm, and for setting up that team. And then the day-to-day people that I've worked with was Christopher Hudak with the State Office of Emergency Management, Angela Bogue with DNR, and then Kelly Romero-Haney, also with DNR. And those individuals really did a great job of just running the day-to-day of the CoBear effort, but also making sure that the watershed recoveries from the state, the federal, and then the local entities are all well coordinated and keeping us all pointed in the right direction. One of the critical first steps of the CoBear is really to get an understanding of the burn severity. And the rapid kind of modern way of doing this is to take a pre- and a post-fire satellite imagery. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get the post-fire satellite imagery until March, basically due to all the snowstorms that we had this winter. So we basically had snow in the basins from January till March. But once we finally got that information in March, we were able to kind of really kick off the CoBear. But once I got that March information, we really kind of confirmed what a lot of people had known is that we basically had minor burn severity. So this is really good news. There were definitely areas that found to burn hotter, but really the majority of the burn area was on grasslands that appeared to have burned very quickly and with relatively minor heat. So this means less likelihood for a very flashy flood response from it. I should add that subject matter experts from the U.S. Forest Service did kind of go out into the field and confirm that minor burn severity determination. So then, using that determination, a team in Ingenuity was then able to perform some H&H modeling and to basically determine what was our increased flood risk as a result of the fire. And so the dots on the screen there kind of indicate areas where basically the modeling is saying we have relative increase of flood depth risk or higher shear values near that infrastructure. So keep in mind though, we're dealing with minor burn severity, and so these dots likely represent areas that just need to be monitored in the coming years. If we were dealing with high burn severity and we had highly hydrophobic soils, then these dots would require immediate intervention. But as it stands now, it's kind of looking like we don't have to take any immediate action, but hopefully Mother Nature does not decide to prove us wrong with that one. So this slide just shows some of my concerns kind of moving into the future. On the left, you see the Coal Creek Channel just upstream of Superior. We still have a lot of kind of down limbs and trees kind of in the creek. So we'll have to monitor these in the future to see if they become a channel clogging hazard or some kind of a flood hazard. On the top right, a lot of the tributary channels in the Superior area have kind of had a history of having little minor landslides. And so I do worry that these might be further destabilized in the future due to the impacts of the fire. And then finally, in the bottom right is just what the grasslands kind of look like today. These grasslands are really just bouncing back with a great spring regrowth. Very encouraging to see that. But one thing you might notice there is kind of little mini sand dunes are developing, and so there's a lot of loose soils that are kind of blowing around these sand or these grassland areas, and that soil is accumulating in the gullies and accumulating these little sand dunes. And so I do worry that those might get mobilized during a future storm event and kind of get sent downstream, causing some flooding problems or some water quality problems. So where do we go from here? In the past, I've always kind of thought about elevated flood risk after a fire, so floods after fires. I guess I've been wondering if maybe the district has the ability to kind of flip this statement around. Is there mitigation efforts that we could do to address some of the fire issues and thereby address some of the long-term flooding issues? The image on the left kind of got me thinking that really the Marshall wildfire occurred in an area that I never really expected it to happen to. Obviously a bit naive on that line of thinking, but I always thought that if a fire did happen in the Boulder area, it would happen in kind of the foothills or in the wildland urban interface areas in the foothills above the city of Boulder. So, I think that figure kind of points out to me is that maybe these WUI areas extend a little bit further into the heart of the district, and maybe we need to think about how we manage these areas a little bit differently. And then the image on the right there from the fire adaptive communities, one of the things I've been trying to talk about is just the importance of developing networks and relationships. And so that figure there talks about partnerships. Now, one of the partnerships I don't think the district has developed to this point is just one with the firefighting communities. I'm not really sure what I expect to come out of this, but I do want to reach out to that community just to see what they need to be able to fight fires in these open space corridors that we design and we manage. Are there simple steps that we can take to kind of make their lives and their jobs easier? After all, sometimes we're starting nearly from scratch, as shown in this aerial image of this project on the slide here. Now, I recently presented to the Lone Tree City Council, and they indicated to me that a fire district had spoke to them just kind of a few meetings before me. And the fire district had said essentially what they need is what they termed speed bumps in open space corridors. So these speed bumps essentially allow them space and time to be able to fight a fire. Can we incorporate speed bumps into some of our projects? I do want to keep in mind that the Marshall wildfire jumped over US 36, which is essentially a 130-foot wide concrete speed bump. So there's obviously, we've got to manage our expectations with this, but I do think we can play a role. Then the passing of 7G a few years ago provided some much needed additional maintenance dollars. Are there drainage away corridors that we should kind of be paying attention to for additional maintenance efforts? Now, in 2021, the district spent over $300,000 in the city of Boulder doing vegetation removal and tree removal. These are big maintenance efforts, and they come with big costs. That said, they're just a drop in the bucket compared to the estimated $1 billion loss associated with the Marshall wildfire. I'll always remember a comment that we got last year from a resident that basically informed us that Cub Scouts could do a better job at removing trees along a section of Bluebell Canyon Creek. And we're removing trees in the city of Boulder, so that's not exactly an unexpected comment, but the problem wasn't that we had hired Cub Scouts to do the work, quite the opposite. The problem was that literally all the trees in the valley were dead and dying from the emerald ash borer. And we still had debris in there from the 2013 flood. And so the district was happy to be removing the trees because it represented a problem or a flooding issue for the downstream community, but I was also be happy to removing those trees because they were directly adjacent to the Chautauqua Auditorium and presented a fire hazard for that facility. So hopefully it's never needed, but I think our Cub Scouts created quite a decent little speed bump near the auditorium that day. So in closing, I guess I'll ask the government partners in the room a question. Do you have the network and the support processes in place to be able to respond to a disaster such as Marshall wildfire? How prepared are you? It's got to be so much easier to develop that network now, before the disaster, rather than during. So please reach out to your neighbors, reach out to the district, and let us know how we can help you. Thank you.